Animals. This animal's unclean. This animal's unclean. This animal's unclean. This animal's unclean, so on and so forth. Like in Leviticus 11, verse 8. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. It doesn't say you must not eat their meat because you'll be unclean. It says they are unclean for you. Okay? And it continues on. In verse 12, anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be detestable to you. That gets more into this abomination kind of a word. And so what I had to look at was, and try and reconcile it, okay, if someone eats a pork chop, are they unclean? Is the physical act of putting a pork chop in your mouth unclean? No. Or does it make you unclean, I should say? The physical act, putting that pork chop in your mouth, does not make you unclean. The physical act.
The food itself.
However, well, the food is unclean for you.
Right.
So it's not food.
So one is not food.
Right.
Right. Yeshua, in Matthew 15, Mark 7, what's the first thing he mentioned in both chapters that come out of a man's heart that make him unclean? The first thing. Oh. Evil thoughts. Evil thoughts. Which goes to what Deanna was saying. And we're going to get into evil here in just a little bit because I want to show you guys something on this. The physical act of picking up that pork chop and eating it doesn't make you unclean. However, everything that led up to that action, the decisions that you make that come from in your heart, that makes you unclean.
So in
Jim.
other words, if you're ignorant, you're not unclean.
You're not held
Correct.
to that standard anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yes, Fred.
Well, if you'll notice, all of the unclean foods are not allowed to be on the altar to be sacrificed to God.
Absolutely.
And your heart is supposed to be the altar of God.
Exactly.
So you
Good
cannot,
parallel.
have unclean food and talk to God. And the other is the unclean foods all have to do with death.
All animals die.
No, but they have to do with death is that animals that we are not allowed to eat other animals.
That's right.
And since we are not allowed, God is separated from death. Death is not to be around him. We're not allowed to bring some death into our
Yeah, when you look at
with God.
these animals that are unclean and what they do, you see scavengers and filters and all those different things. So yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, I've had this question for 6 years, so hopefully you can answer it.
The answer is no.
Why doesn't he say, and the owls shall be unclean for you? Instead of 7 different owls. And then,
Well, the rest of them hadn't evolved yet.
I guess not.
Oh, there it is. That's an age-old question.
How many owls, Ty? One more time. How many owls?
Yeah, 7, I think.
7.
So each region has its own island.
I'm just saying, I mean,
Because
it's
he does
just
say
been,
in all. There are some of them that he says in all.
Mhm.
Like all the ostrich, or all the herons.
but it's not all the owl.
Right.
It's not all the owl. That's kind of weird.
Right.
I don't have the answer. The answer is,
Because I want to know which one I can go shoot and eat. I mean, that's what's next. I mean, come on. That's what I'm looking for.
yeah, see, the barn owl's not in here, right?
Right. I didn't see
Hey,
a
there
barn
you
owl.
go.
I didn't see one.
Wait, it has white owl. Barn owls have white faces. Anyway,
What about that owl that was on the endangered species list? Is he on there?
the spotted owl, yeah, he's got to be on here somewhere.
How about owl?
You know, that's probably why the spotted owl is endangered, because he wasn't on this
That's
list.
true.
See?
But that actually goes to the same question of they're very, very specific. You know, and some of these I've never heard of except for in scripture.
Right.
And that's because we don't have a today's translation for what that was.
Exactly,
Which
yeah.
is fine.
Hoopoe.
Which is fine. But at the same time, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the vultures. It wasn't the ones that are going to eat the dead. He didn't describe them in that manner at all.
But owls eat rats.
Well, I get that,
Yeah.
but I understand that, but I'm saying he named them by name, not by what they did. And so, to go on the generalization that it's the filters and those kind of things, I know that that's why, but at the same time, it doesn't give that for reasoning, it gives the specific animal.
Well, and I just did a quick count here in the NIV, and it's 6 owls.
Is it 6?
Yeah.
Well, that's
But that's the
What are
NIV,
you
so.
saying? He also lists the bat, and there are bats that don't eat meat, they just eat fruit.
Eat fruit
So
and
that's
insect.
still, you know,
Yeah.
nasty.
I think we got the voice of common sense in the back again.
Let's go back to our biology of all this. You have herbivores. So you've got grass-eating animals, you have meat-eating animals on that, birds, and also in fish, they're very similar to all this. And you have scavengers, which are going to be your buzzards, stuff of this nature. So if you just start looking at it, there's going to be some crosses that don't really fit. A horse would be an example, which is a grass-eating animal, or a camel, but we don't eat those
Right.
on that. So we tried to get specific on some of these areas.
Yeah.
But if you just go back to, God made the whole project of all the different animals. Rabbits, they eat grass, they don't eat dead animals. They're
Right.
not really scavengers, but they feed the coyotes and, the
Mhm.
owls and
But
all
he
of
knew
this.
they would also be associated with Easter later on. so
I'm sure
that's
he
what-
probably, yeah, exactly.
I know.
But that speaks to the point though.
Yeah.
With those animals, with the cow and with the camel and with those things, he laid out, okay, this is why, chew the cud, split hoof.
Mhm.
I mean, he laid those things out.
Yeah, with the
For
birds, he
these,
doesn't.
He doesn't, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like I said, maybe I'm just trying to dive too deep into something else.
I'll tell you
but
what the
it's-
answer is. I have the answer to the question. Just ask God when you get there.
Amen.
No, yes.
I want to share something personal with y'all. I had a immune system real low for a lot of years. I'm 50, so 30 years, and I kept fighting antibiotics, Quit eating meat, I ain't been sick, huh? No blood. And I'm okay,
I'd rather
He
just-
sets up dietary rules for a reason.
but I'm just telling you I'm living it.
My commentary lists this way. The passage documents the animals that are clean or kosher for human consumption. The following are the criteria for kosher. Mammals must possess split hoof and chew the cud. Aquatic must possess fins and scales. Birds must possess elongated middle toe and hind toe. Crop and gazelles cannot be raptors. Insects must possess hind legs with joints above the backs for hopping. Locusts, bold locusts, and grasshoppers. And then it says, see Deuteronomy 14:3 through 21. And then it talks about the old English term for rabbit. Now, rabbit doesn't truly chew its cud. It looks like it does, but it's not really truly chewing.
Yeah.
It is.
It also has paws.
And it has paws and not hooves, yeah. Yeah. And he gave that parallel, Deuteronomy 14:3 through 21. And Deuteronomy 14 is when it's the next generation, and they're kind of getting the reminder. It's a little bit more of a Reader's Digest kind of version of this, but the same kind of things.
Also a second witness.
Also a second witness, yeah, so. Okay,
Another question.
yes.
You may get into it at some point in time. When does a carcass no longer become a carcass? Oh,
No clue.
okay.
When does a carcass no longer become a carcass? Or
Once it's tanned, it's no longer a carcass. A hide, once it's tanned, it's no longer a carcass.
how about one laying in the dirt? When is it no longer a carcass?
When the worms are done with it,
That may be the good answer, I don't know, when it's not there anymore.
Roadkill?
I don't know. Okay. So anyway, the point being to this whole discussion is verse 24 of chapter 11. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. So, what makes you unclean in regard to these animals is touching the carcass, touching them, which is kind of go to your question earlier, Jay. Is it a sin? I say yes, because God says don't do it. Right?
I think it's
No.
wrong.
Wrong.
I disagree.
Oh, hold on, we have a wrong. Why?
He didn't tell you not to touch it. He just says you will become unclean.
Yeah.
That's true.
Good
Yeah,
point.
because you'd have to get rid of stuff dead, you couldn't just leave it
Whosoever
rot
touches the
there.
carcass.
Yeah.
Well, just like, and even the priest in the temple became unclean when they had to deal with death. And but that was a temporary.
Oh, wow.
There's one though, I think God is a God of the future, because when I lived again in the Dominican Republic, they had these big chicken farms, yeah, the Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever came and got their chickens, or brought them in, whatever, but whatever was dead or left over, the local people picked them up and gone sell them on the local. So he knows what we're gonna be or what we're up to, what our future holds. I just told you what I lived. That's another reason I like meat. I don't know what's been.
I think it really boils down to the act of disobedience to his word that makes you unclean. It's not what you did. Yeah, you consume something unclean or whatever. That doesn't make you unclean. It's the act of disobedience to the word.
Amen.
That's exactly right.
Because that, he goes
That's the
through,
opposite.
I mean, that's what he tells us, to be obedient.
Be obedient to God.
That's what he just demonstrated in chapter 10.
Yeah, because if we're not obedient to him, then we're doing what we want to.
Mhm.
That's right.
Exactly. Yes, Brett?
Also, many times you would be sinning if you didn't touch your carcass, because let's say you find someone that's dying and you're trying to help him, and he dies while you're trying to help him, then you have touched a carcass. And so you become unclean until evening. But if you hadn't helped him, then you would have been sinning.
So,
Well, yeah, but does it,
Christ touched somebody. dead.
Then me.
There is one that he says, do not touch,
Can it see that?
the pig.
Where does he say
"Do
that?"
not touch it. It says in verse 8.
Good.
He just talked about the pig in verse 7 and 8. He says, you must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. So there's is one that we're not to touch.
Well,
The others, he
but
says,
again,
it
they
makes you
are unclean
unclean
to
till
you.
evening.
Yes, Ty?
Okay, remember in Monty Python when, and I've
No,
got-
I've never seen it.
Gotta point to this. Remember in Monty Python when the guy's pulling the cart and he's saying, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead." This one's not dead yet.
Yeah.
Hits him on the head. Anyway,
Crazy.
there was actually someone's job to actually go and pick up the dead, especially when they were that generation was told, "Well, you can't enter the land, so you're all gonna die out here in the wilderness." And it was also told to them they could not have an unclean camp. They had to have this, they had to have that. And so it was one of those things where, and there was even provision for the priests to touch a relative, but it was while they weren't in service of being the
Right.
priest that week or whatever it was.
Which we had the example of in chapter 10.
Right.
Yep.
So that's my point, is that so the guy that's job it is to go clean up all the dead people, does that mean he's just gonna be sinning forever? I mean, every day he's just gotta go to work, gotta go sin,
Gotta go sin, yeah.
that's not his intent. His intent was actually to do what God wanted.
Or if
Is
you're,
Fulfill his role in the body.
Right.
if you're the breakfast cook in a college and it's ham, bacon, sausage, one every day of the week,
Yeah.
That's true.
And I think there's a distinction, important distinction between uncleanliness and sin. Because you look, the term unclean, we're gonna get to it in 12, is if you have leprosy, if you're found to have leprosy, it may be the result of sin, that may be a different discussion.
Right.
But just being leprous makes you unclean. It doesn't make you sinful.
Right.
Well,
So there's a distinction between sin and cleanliness, if you will.
Women in
Yeah, absolutely.
Menstrual cycle.
Every woman is a sinner.
Yeah.
all over it.
Weekly sinner.
But, I mean, you get in some real elaborate
I think
laws,
that's perfect.
like
Yeah,
restrictions related to that.
that's true.
Where they set, I mean,
Sleep over there, sleep.
we're talking about some elaborate.
Yeah. We'll get there, and that's when we kick the women out for a week, and they have to go live in a tent out in the back of the property, right?
I didn't hear Deb's.
Do you have your tent ready?
Women during their menstrual cycle. No. My tent's ready for me, yeah, because I know I'll have to go there, so. Okay, so,
Well, they kick you out.
yeah, it's gonna kick me out, you got that right. Okay, so the point is, and we've kind of massaged it down, picking up that pork chop and putting it in your mouth doesn't make you unclean. However, the disobedience does. And God does not like the disobedience. He does not tolerate it, although right now he is tolerating it, he's restoring up punishment.
No.
No.
Deanna actually answered that. Picking up that pork chop does.
Well, okay, picking up the hoopoe.
Yeah, right, there you go. Because it is the carcass.
But is the pork chop a carcass, or is it just a piece of the meat, or semantics? Okay, now here's the question we have to answer, because we deal with this on a daily basis with our friends, family, relatives, coworkers. Correct? Pretty much this topic comes up all the time. Yes or no? All the time. I can eat whatever I want because of the verse that Deanna didn't read when she read in Mark. The parenthetical that doesn't exist in the original language. Okay. 1, did Yeshua declare all foods clean? No. Good. Did he teach against Torah?
No.
How so?
He said to keep all these commands. I did not come to do away. Mark.
How did he not teach against Torah in Matthew 15 and Mark 7? How did he not teach against Leviticus chapter 11?
Because it's actually.
Go ahead.
Because he's speaking about what comes from your heart. It's the intention again that we were talking about.
How did he not teach against Leviticus chapter 11? You're right, but I want to get a little more specific because we have to know this stuff, like we talked about earlier.
Because the one time he does say food, he uses the word broma, which means Levitically clean.
Okay, but how did he not teach against Leviticus chapter 11?
Leviticus 11 was about animals.
Right.
And
Okay.
Matthew and the Mark thing are about people.
Hand washing.
But how did he not teach against Leviticus chapter 11? You're all correct. You're all correct, but there's something that, based on our discussion that we've had, that we can say, well, he said this and Leviticus says this. Think about that.
Okay.
Definition of the word food, she said.
Yes?
Okay. And when you're in the New Testament, he was talking about food. He wasn't talking, what they understood as food and what was not food, and we think
Exactly.
is food.
We think food's everything. They knew what food was. That's not quite it, though, what I'm going for.
Are you going for the evil thoughts?
Nope.
No? Okay.
And he was actually talking about hand washing.
He was talking about hand washing. And that's a key that we can always share, is especially from Matthew. Because Matthew doesn't have the parenthetical, and in saying this, Yeshua declared all foods clean. But it actually describes what he's talking about. We're still not quite there.
He's talking about dirt.
It's not in King James. He's talking about dirt. But all right, let me ask it this way. How does Mark 7 and Matthew 15 support Leviticus 11? Maybe that's a better way to ask it. What did he say? What did Yeshua say in Mark 7 and Matthew 15? What did he say? What were his words? Yes. What are his words regarding Leviticus 11? Okay. A little more specific. I want the quote that we have. You guys have the book. Open book test.
Because the whole point was, why do they transgress the tradition of the elders?
True. That's what he's coming against. But what did he say regarding Leviticus chapter 11? How did he support it? Okay,
Because the commandment of God was clean food.
Matthew 15, verse 11. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth, that is what makes him unclean. Did we or did we not establish that putting that hupo in your mouth does not make you unclean? It's everything that came before it that led up to that decision to do that that makes you. That's what he's talking about here. This is the reason I asked it. This is the problem that I had to figure out. How does this in Matthew 15 and Mark 7 support this? And it's in how it's worded. It's not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him unclean, it's what comes out.
Are you saying verbally because they're saying I can't eat it?
They're saying it, or their actions are speaking for them.
Or is he telling us it's, you're gonna eat it, or you're gonna do what you're gonna do, but it's bad for you?
What he's saying, Leviticus 11 does not say if you eat these things you're unclean. It doesn't say that. Correct? So he's saying if you eat them, you're not unclean. The physical act. The action of picking up that food and eating it, that physical action doesn't make you unclean.
It's like sin.
It's
It's up to you if you're gonna
what led to it, because that comes out of your heart. Which goes to what I want to talk about. Let's see.
In 15:3 of Matthew, it says, "Why do ye also transgress the commandments of Elohim by your traditions?"
Yeah, there are a lot of traditions.
I think we need to also bring to this, why did God give that to us?
He was also the God of the present, though, Consuelo. The people who lived right then.
Because,
It gives us a better life.
right, because
Yes.
that other stuff that's proven to make people sick.
Yeah. What do you get for obedience? What do you get for disobedience?
He says too, it's an abomination to you, not necessarily to him, but to you, because our bodies are, temple. Yes, the
Well,
temple, and we're not to put
exactly.
unclean things in the temple.
And what we started with in Leviticus 9, what did Aaron do first?
He made atonement for himself.
Made atonement for himself, because he was unclean. In a sinful state, unclean state, that's semantics, but he had to get right. Because if we're unclean, we can't go to the temple. We can't go to the tabernacle. We can't participate in the service if we're unclean. So don't eat these things, because I have a purpose for them. You'll be unclean. You can't come to where I am. So Yeshua's explaining to them, eating it doesn't make you unclean. It's everything that led up to it. Because when he says, what comes out of a man's heart, what's the first thing he says? Evil thoughts. All right. This is where we really need to spend our time the rest of the day. We got another little bit. Evil. What is evil?
Will you hold that and let me answer Ty's question? Or
Yes.
try to, as he's the upperclassman on the sixth grade. Ty, your answer's in the verse, okay?
Which question is it that we're answering?
15, okay, and the fowl, and why you can't eat the owl? Okay. We didn't ask God in Genesis chapter 1, okay? God made 1,000 trees, and how come I can't eat that one? We get the 999 trees that God gave us for our benefit, okay, but we didn't ask, why can't I eat that fruit? Why can't I eat that fowl, that owl? Okay? You had three categories there. The good and the evil and the abomination. And before I say that, an abomination, 3 weeks ago we had the offerings, morning and evening, because God said it smelled good. I didn't ask him, did it smell like roses, lilacs, lilies, or cinnamon? God said, I like it.
Yeah.
Ty, your verse, God says on the owl, it's not good or bad, it's abomination. Okay? So, he just said it is. The garden, that tree, is bad. These birds
Stay
are
away.
bad. Okay?
Cool.
I have to before we leave it. Is there I mean, why not then leave people ignorant? You know what I'm saying? If it's not the eating of it that makes you unclean and sin, if we're gonna maybe contest that, but then why not leave people ignorant, let them eat whatever they want and let them, then they're not doing anything. Now, your point that we've found, if you will, that maybe eating this stuff is not good for this body, and so maybe there's one reason to, but that's like kind of way off in the scientific area. I mean, they observed science, they knew that, gosh, eat this, you get sick, don't eat it. You know, so they were scientific even back then, but why not just, what's the impetus that says, no, just don't tell them?
Because he says no man has an excuse to be ignorant.
It's already happened. Okay, but really, we really get down to what this whole thing that he is speaking to in Matthew. He's speaking to the heart of man, and he's speaking to man accepting their own doctrine rather than what he's already taught us. He made it, he taught it, then men have made their own doctrine and they teach it to other people.
Jay?
To kind of help deal with this, to stay ignorant has some advantages, but the disadvantage is you'll never have that relationship with God.
Well, and I think it goes to what he told, why he picked Abraham. Because he will teach his children. And so there's this implication.
Because
that
he
says
knows the heart.
That you're supposed to actually teach and not
Right.
leave ignorant.
Also, he did not allow unclean foods to come before him.
Right.
And if you touched it, you became unclean until evening.
Right.
So you were not allowed to come into his holy presence. So he informs you, if you do this, don't come into my holy presence until evening.
Yeah. Rudy?
What a merciful God.
God said it, and Scripture says it, then just
Let's do it.
Don't question it. Because when you're questioning it, that's an evil principality that you're entering in your mouth. Straight
Not
up.
necessarily. I think it's important to understand where we can understand, because other people are gonna ask, you know, well, why would God tell us not to eat these things? Well, medicine has proven that you eat these things and it harms your body. And the funny thing is that more people are willing to listen to scientific fact than they are willing to listen to God. So I agree with you in that we should be questioning in a rebellious way, but I do think that it's important for us to understand where we can.
That's like children always ask why.
Right.
They're asking so they can have a greater understanding, so that they can share it when they're older too.
Right.
Instead of, okay, my mom said so, which is great to a point.
Yeah, from my perspective, I try to eat clean for health purposes. From longevity, the first promise was to honor your father and mother that you will have long life. That's where he says you'll get the long life from. We will live better. The other thing is, since the temple's gone and all that, we're told that this is the temple. God's not going to reside in a dirty temple. So we have to do what we can do according to his word, which is be obedient, obey the commandments, and eat properly and so forth, so that we will be healthy enough and everything, that his presence will reside in us. Because if we are out there doing our thing, not worried about him or anything or whatever, then why would I think that he's going to answer prayers for me or heal me or anything like that, you know? Because he's not with me.
Right. Sylvia?
It's like Deanna was saying, it's so important that we know everything in the Word of God, what He tells us, when we're obedience and disobedience at. Because I run